Hey guys, I am James Kleimann. I'm the managing web editor here at The Real Deal. And of course, it's Friday. And as such, we are recapping the biggest real estate stories of the week. And we're also going to be giving you an inside look at our reporting process for a story we're going to drop next week. And so we've also got a little bit of a resi theme happening here. So we're going to be discussing the merger between Brown Harris Stevens and Halstead, plus the state of New York City's rental market. It's not good. And we're also going to do a deep dive into the bulk buys that we've been seeing take place in the condo market. And if you haven't already, I would really urge you to subscribe to The Real Deal. Our reporters and editors are working hard every day to bring transparency to a market that is not really known for it. And they're dispelling myths and giving you the inside scoop on who's buying, who's selling, who's moving to a new firm, and also, of course, who's losing their shirt. So with that out of the way, I figured this would be a good time to introduce our senior reporter, Evie Solomont. Evie, hello.
Hi, James. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good.
All right. Evie, you reported yesterday, in fact, not just reported, you broke the news that Brown Harris Stevens and Halstead would be merging into one firm, and that'll give them about 2,500 agents who last year tallied about $9 billion in sales. That's according to Real Trends. And so for context, Douglas Elliman, which is really the big player in New York City here, they've got about 2,500 agents in the metro area, and they did about $8 billion in sales last year. So the first question is, what led Terra Holdings, the parent company, to make this decision? Is this because of the pandemic? Was this in the works for a while? Kind of what's the backstory here?
Sure. Well, I actually want to go back a little bit to give a little bit of context. So Brown Harris Stevens is one of the oldest firms in the city. It was established in 1873. So it has been around forever. And it's one of the sort of, it has a stronghold in the luxury market and it dominates the high end. Halstead is more than a century younger. It was founded in 1987, I believe, and both were acquired by Terra Holdings in the 1990s and 2001. So basically, over the past few years, brokerage margins have just gotten really thin. There's been a lot of competition in the market, whether it's from third-party sites, aggregators kind of nibbling away at the edges, or new models, tech models. And so in general, companies have been sort of squeezed in terms of profit margins. So even before the pandemic, something like this wouldn't have been totally unheard of and wouldn't have been totally crazy, especially since they do share corporate ownership. And in the case of Brown Harris and Halstead, the owners did start thinking about this a few months ago. Then when COVID hit and all the firms sort of had to make some really hard cuts and kind of think about the way forward, Terra decided to consolidate under the Brown Harris brand and kind of pull the trigger on something that they've been thinking about.
Right. And so you mentioned that I always think of BHS as being sort of like a blue blood, like old money, Upper East Side, like kind of like a white shoe, kind of firm. And Halstead doesn't really evoke the same image to me. They're a little younger. They mostly do kind of rental deals. I would be more likely to go with a Halstead if I were looking for a place than a Brown Harris Stevens, for example. And so it seems like there's a very different culture here. And if they're going to be operating as one company, how is that going to work? What does the leadership look like? What is this new company?
Right. Well, so Bess Friedman, the CEO of Brown Harris Stevens, is going to be the chief executive of the combined firm. And Diane Ramirez, who co-founded Halstead, is going to, her title isn't exactly clear. She's going to have a senior leadership role, potentially within Terra Holdings, kind of an executive level position. And you're right, they have really different cultures. Brown Harris Stevens isn't just old money, it's new money. Brown Harris was involved in Jeff Bezos's $80 million deal on Fifth Avenue. Halstead has a really strong rental division, but it's not just rentals. They're more of a volume player with regard to sales as well, and they have a really strong regional presence. So if you go to, Fairfield County, some parts of the Hudson Valley.
Big in Jersey even?
Jersey, Brooklyn, they're really strong there too. So it's interesting. I think the culture piece is a big challenge, but when you look at these two brands, there was a reason why Terra had them, had two different brokerages for all this time. They are very different. They dominate different parts of the market. It's not where that one is weak. It's just they were strong in different ways. And so what they're hoping is that they can combine them and be stronger in a more holistic way.
Have you heard anything from agents?
I think that, no, agents, I think time will tell. I think right now everyone's just really shocked. A lot of the emails going out are like, I think that they're shocked because the companies have these different cultures. So not shocked in the sense that, oh, wow, where's consolidation coming from? I mean, consolidation is taking over the residential business, certainly. But I think agents are just like, whoa, what is this going to mean? And it is going to be it's going to be a challenge to fit together. But then again, about a year ago, Compass acquired Dribbling and Associates, which was similarly like an older, not 1873 old, but like an older Upper East Side firm with a strong company culture. They lost some agents, but not a huge exodus. So it is possible. So who knows?
Is there any indication that there's going to be layoffs? Any kind of like mid-level sales managers, or I'm just trying to think, like, if you're Terra, obviously you want to realize some cost savings. You want to make sure that you're not too top heavy, that you don't have, a huge amount of leases and liabilities if things don't recover in the market. They must be looking at something like office closures at the least, right?
Right. Well, so the official line is that they want to keep on as many staff members as possible, and they want to keep as many offices open as possible. I think the biggest liability right now from a financial perspective is the leases, because theoretically, if you have more agents, you need more managers. You don't want to, especially if you're a full service brokerage firm. But there's definitely redundancies. Halstead has a 17,000 square foot headquarters. They didn't say what's going to happen to it.
It's on Park Ave, right?
On Park Ave.
Yeah,
Brown also has one. They've got 55 offices. Are they going to need 55? That's very unclear, especially, in this post-corona world that we're in, where it's totally unclear, what the need is for physical office space anyway. I think that a lot of brokerage firms can see a scenario where they don't need as much space.
Interesting. Did we see anything like that? So, back in, I think it was January, maybe December, Corcoran absorbed City Habitats, which, again, kind of a similar dynamic here, right? Are there any lessons to be learned or any takeaways from that merger that we might be able to portend for this change with BHS and Halstead?
Well, there actually are a lot of similarities. So Corcoran Group and City Habitats were both owned by Realogy Holdings, and Realogy consolidated them under the Corcoran name. And they mostly avoided any, big cuts, but it's really hard to say because the pandemic happened not too long after. But I think what's interesting is that you see this broader theme, this broader trend of consolidation in the industry, where owners are seeing that it just doesn't make sense to spend $1 million in a brand marketing campaign for two different brokerage firms when you can just pool your resources into one strong identity. That's what Corcoran did with City. That's what Brown Harris and Halstead are hoping to do now.
And you expect to see a lot more of that? And when I look at the landscape here, it really looks like it's now Elliman, Corcoran, Compass, and BHS. And I can't really think of anyone else who could even touch them in terms of financial firepower and just the ability to tap different credit lines and to raise money. If you're a smaller firm like a Bond or a Bold or a Mirador or something, you must look at this and think, should I be absorbed or is my calling now to absorb even smaller firms and become that mid-sized fish?
Mm-hmm. Well, not all of the firms you mentioned are necessarily small. In terms of firepower, one big question mark for some of the last few independent firms in New York, and there are a few, is Berkshire Hathaway. They have the firepower, and they've been circling New York, for a really long time.
But they haven't bought anything.
They haven't, but over the past few years, there have been rumors. The rumors kind of go up, down. Brown Harris is Berkshire Hathaway is circling, it's not circling. So I think that there are definitely more acquisitions to be had. Yesterday, after the story broke, I got a few emails from independent CEOs saying, I'm the last man standing. There are a handful left. Some of them just don't want to be acquired, but for others, who knows how long they're going to want to, just fight tooth and nail every day.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Hebe. I really appreciate the time, and I hope you have a great weekend, and I look forward to some follow-ups over the next few weeks.
Okay. Take care.
All right. And joining me now, we have Aaron Hudson, who, normally when we get these reports, we call them the element reports at the office, and it's really just kind of a breakdown of the rental market, and it's broken down into Manhattan and then everything else. And, normally it's kind of ho-hum. It's landlords aren't doing as great as they had been, but they're propping things up on the face rent side by offering, concessions, and things are more or less the same as they've been for the last year or two. And then I saw the headline in this week's, and wow, it was quite a bit different. Aaron, not looking so great. Can you tell me a little bit about what's going on, at least in Manhattan, on the rental side?
Right. So it's the monthly report that is produced by Douglas Elliman, but it's Jonathan Miller, industry's favorite appraiser, who produces these reports. And so in May, it was there was the greatest number of unrented apartments on the market since Jonathan began tracking the monthly Manhattan vacancy in 2006. So yeah, it says a lot about where we're at. And I mean,
do you remember what that number was, Aaron? Was it, 4%, 5%?
2.88%.
Okay.
So compared to last year's, compared to last year, the vacancy rate was 1.65%. So obviously vacancies have gone up a lot. But I mean, it's worth noting in April of this year, vacancies were at 2.42%. So, I mean, the story here really is that, leasing activity, new leases, people signing new apartments is really dropping. And it's harder if you have an empty apartment to find somebody who's willing to sign a lease and move in and start paying you. And so, I mean, we can get into what the report shows, but I think one thing that that Jonathan was telling me in April for April's report, and then also for May's report, is that there's a lot of activity that we can't track because they're happening between landlords and tenants when they're renewing their leases. So that's, unless landlord...
An example, would it be like, we'll do a month to month because you don't know what your situation is going to look like in 6 months, and I don't either, or...
It could be, or maybe
deals that don't register.
Yeah, or maybe it's somebody saying, okay, I want to extend my lease a month, 2 months. What I hear from rental brokers is that when the city first kind of went into lockdown, a lot of people didn't really know whether moving was an essential service or not, let alone the safety aspect of it. So throughout April, it was really, I think a lot of rental brokers were telling me it's very slow. The market's kind of frozen. Nobody's coming in and out. The people that I was hearing were signing leases, and also agents can't show apartments. So who's going to sign a lease on an apartment they can't see?
And you can't evict tenants, right? So it's just everything is kind of like frozen in time in a weird way, right?
Definitely. It seems as though, and this is completely anecdotal, but it seemed as though it was actually some first responders coming into New York. Those were some of the people who were moving during April. In May, the leasing activity is still down a lot, but it is going up a little bit. So the way Jonathan put it to me is that this market is still, we're not seeing real numbers. That's why we're seeing rent either stay flat or tick up a little bit. In the case of Brooklyn, these aren't real numbers. They're real, but these are distorted numbers.
Okay, not everything is fake news. There's no fiction here. It's just not everything is taken into account on the report, right?
It's a math issue.
I want to dispel that immediately for all those watching at home. This is not fake news.
Yeah. But you're starting to see a bit more activity now. So, I asked him, why aren't we seeing huge drops in rent? He was saying it's just too soon to start seeing this, but, that may be where we go. I think this is just going to be a story we keep following month to month. And now these reports are definitely a lot more interesting.
They certainly are. And I wanted to come back to a point that you made earlier, that you were speaking to a lot of rental brokers, and they're kind of letting you know, we just haven't seen a lot of activity, things are not really moving all that much. If you're a rental broker, this is the time you make your money. like June, July, August, September, this is prime time. What does their situation look like? How are they making this work, or are they?
Well, I think a lot of agents are on kind of a wait and see mode. I think a lot of people have a newfound or brand new sense of belief in the virtual tours. And, I think agents, when they can, are trying to make this work. Doing a virtual tour with someone who is interested. I think, especially as phase 2 is kind of looming and just consumer fear is lessening, they're starting to see a little bit of an uptick. But, I think a lot remains to be seen. I mean, how many people may have dropped out of the industry? I was talking to a rental broker just as, the shutdown took place, and he was saying, he literally kept showing apartments right up until Governor Cuomo's order went into effect, where he couldn't. And, he was just saying, like, a lot of people have credit card debt. Like, did people budget themselves for this unforeseeable moment? How are people doing financially? That's a big question. And I think that's definitely something, that we'll see, how many people are back in the business, do get themselves restarted.
It's funny because also a lot of landlords now, they're not just competing with, the pandemic, they're also competing with the sublet market. There are a lot of people, like my wife and I, we left the city, we're out visiting relatives in Long Island, and a lot of other people are too. Like, I wouldn't pay $3,000 a month for my apartment if I'm not going to be here, and probably won't. So is that a concern that you hear cropping up in the market? I don't think you've ever seen that robust a sublet market. There was never a platform for it. It was, like a Facebook friend, or, kind of like a word of mouth sort of thing, or Craigslist, which is downright terrifying. So is that, I can't think of this as a good time if you're a multifamily landlord and you're trying, maybe you have a vacancy, or you're just trying to get rid of an apartment in the next few months. Do you expect there will be price drops or even more drastic measures?
I think, I can't say for certain, but definitely concessions are going up. So in May, we saw concessions increase. Rents didn't drop yet, but there seems to be a weakening that is likely to continue. One thing that was sort of interesting is that both in terms of leasing activity and then in some cases pricing, larger apartments, the deals are not getting done on 2-3 bedrooms. And those are actually seen in May, so it's preliminary, but those are sort of starting to see a little bit more rent price weakening. So that is, I can't speak so much to how multifamily landlords are feeling right now, but going into a story that I was working on this week with Sylvia, investors really look at rent prices when it comes, because for them, they're buying, especially a luxury apartment, they're going to be renting that out. That's part of the business strategy. And so I was kind of looking through this report with an eye on that, of just how are these, we hear this idea that, people will want to live in bigger apartments. They won't want to be in a studio apartment. They won't want to be in a 1-bedroom. But that's actually where we were sort of seeing the biggest drops in leasing activity and pricing. And when it came to Manhattan's top 10%, the highest asking rent, so the luxury rental market in Manhattan, that's actually where you saw the biggest drop in median rent price of about 6%, whereas for the whole borough last month, rents pretty much just stayed flat. So, which again is a distortion. We don't see the full picture yet.
But it could be telling.
These are indicators that, anyone who's kind of reliant on an investment property that is turned into a rental, that market, just may not be there anymore in the same way.
So let's talk a little bit more about that story that you and Sylvia worked on. It's mostly about the condo market. but I think it touches on so many different elements for investors and for developers. I want to start off with kind of a quote here. It's you're chatting with this guy, and his name is Miles Horn, and he's an investor and a developer, and he's bought and sold something like 5,000 units in bulk over the last 40 years. And it's been sort of a niche market. And he says it's a very, very small business. Now everyone and their mother is looking for these deals. How many mothers are really looking for these condos? And what kind of prices are they getting? Are they actually selling, or is it just a lot of idle interest?
Well, I think we're at the beginning of this now, and we're, the answer to that question, of course, remains to be seen, and people are certainly looking at this market and saying, will there be a big wave of bulk deals? But to his point, there are all these investors out there now who are looking at the market and saying, okay, the pandemic has taken a huge toll. Developers are feeling more urgent about selling these units. There's a big glut out there, as we know, particularly in the luxury space. And in addition, it's harder to get financing. It's harder to get inventory loans now. So there's a whole lot of pressure points which make this quite a ripe time for these investors to come in and scout around for these bulk deals, which is exactly what they're doing. And that's what the story kind of peels back the layers on.
And so, when we talk about these bulk deals, are we talking about, certain ranges in price? Is there a sweet spot of like $4 million for a condo in Chelsea at, say, like the HFZ project, or, are these the penthouses at some of the more kind of extraordinary luxury properties that would trade for $60 million when the market is hot in 2015 or 2016, but maybe goes for 40 now? Like, are there any trends that we can kind of look through already, or is it still too soon?
Well, I think with regards to price, there's a tension there, of course, because the investors are wanting a big cut, right? They're wanting a big discount. And sometimes the developers are offering, they're not going that far because they also have their lenders to consider and the release prices. And so what we heard was that a lot of the time, for an investor to get the rental returns that they're looking for on that property, should they buy all these units, they need the discount to be great, and that might be just a bridge too far for that developer. So I think that in terms of pricing trends, that will be something that we can kind of analyze going forward as more of these deals take place.
Were you able to chat with any lenders, kind of how they feel about this? Often in some of the condo projects that started to come online over the last few years, the lenders were a lot more active, than they had been in kind of the prior cycle. They wanted to make sure that they were putting their money toward a good investment, and obviously the senior lender is going to get paid first, and then it kind of, trickles down. But what is kind of the feeling from lenders on what a bulk condo sale looks like?
Well, I think, I spoke to a lender for the story, and I think the idea is that there is a release price. So that's kind of the price that at the very lowest, the retail price is usually going to be higher than that. But that's the price where that's what the deal has to go for. But I think there's a sense that some money is better than nothing, and that especially if it's not below that release price, it's going to be fine. So, the condo market is not in great shape, especially in Manhattan. So I think, there's some realistic views of if you have an opportunity and you have a deal, maybe you're going to go through with it.
Right. If you can shed, say, 10 units at a 12% discount, given the overall climate, maybe that's just worthwhile, and you can pay back some of the construction loan or, whatever's happening right now.
Right. I think the big question for investors, like Miles Horn, is, they're actually saying that even on the bulk deals, lenders and developers are not willing to go down low enough. So kind of the rule of thumb is that there should be a 30 to 40% discount. And, and that's not given these extraordinary times that we're in and the extraordinary situation of the condo market. So we actually heard that there was a little bit of hesitancy from these bulk buyers to jump in. So it'll be interesting, and that's kind of tied to the rental market in a way, because if everyone were to leave the city or not rent at the same, that wasn't like renting a New York apartment suddenly becomes so much harder. Will the business model still work? And did you buy at a low enough discount that you can handle it?
Maybe sell it a few years down the road, when things kind of clear up a bit. What is there a profile of like what does a bulk condo buyer look like? Are these institutional investors, or these hedge funders, or these kind of cowboy types? Like who would be saying, I want to buy 12 units at this HFZ project, or a Simon Barron project? Who are we talking about when we talk about these investors?
Well, one is. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, it's a mixture. You've got your high net worth individuals, you've got your firms, you've got all sorts of people out there. But essentially, some of them have had experience in the past. I spoke to one investor who had previously been involved with a bulk trade at his prior firm after the last financial crisis. And so sometimes these guys, they're familiar with this and they're versed in what they're looking for. Of course, it's a very strange time we're in, so they're not totally comfortable with the climate like everyone else. We're all just feeling it out. But a lot of these investors sort of know their way around the modeling.
And I guess you figure, a lot of these high net worth individuals and certain funds, they need to put their money to work. They need to get returns. They don't just want to be sitting on cash necessarily. So if they can get something at a 40% discount, hold it for 5 years, maybe you kind of realize a huge profit, right? It's almost like a mini version of the Blackstone model, right? So.
Well, it also kind of depends on how long you can hold on to the unit, I think.
Sure.
If you buy a bulk package and you can hold on to it for 10 years and then on sell it, maybe you'd get a great return or make a lot of profit on it. Other investors are looking to turn it around quicker, which is where more uncertainty comes in, because market forecasting is hard, but it's particularly hard, I think, in the immediate future right now. Other investors want to rent out the units, and so there's a whole variety of ways in which you could put these units to work should you invest in that way. And I think that's tied up in some of the pitches too. Like one of the pitches that I saw, it had modeling for sales, it had modeling for rental opportunities within that condo. But the modeling itself was also controversial, because what are you basing the market on?
Right, like who knows who's going to pay what? Yeah.
One thing that I've heard as well is just that, some of the players who've been bulk buyers before, part of that model would include updating the building, adding amenities or redoing amenities. And what we're hearing this time around is that you have this glut of luxury condos that are in brand new buildings that are outfitted with brand new amenities. So the idea that you're going to be able to add value to the building and really get that markup is sort of debatable, unless, like Sylvia mentioned, like you can hold and wait and maybe do those updates.
Right, like there's no upside play in a condo built in like 2016. Yeah. Interesting. Cool. And so this story should be coming out next week. I'm really excited. I'm looking forward to reading it. I want to thank you both for being with me today. This has been yet another edition of the TRD Reporters Roundtable. I guess I don't remember what we call it actually. So we'll be back with that on what is it?
I said we'll go with that.
We'll go with that. That works as good as any. So thanks everybody once again, and please, if you have not already subscribed, please do so, and you'll get a 10% discount. So you just have to type in the code James. So my boss is going to kill me. So sorry. All right, everybody. Thanks very much. Have a great weekend.